Hello everyone, I'm Simon Ford of Ford's Gin. Martinis, gin and tonics, Negronis, great classic cocktails is what I'm about. But I also love to hear from great bartenders from around the world, which is why we've partnered with Beyond the Drink for this season. Cheers.
Well, you just heard from the man himself, Simon Ford, and we are glad this season of Beyond the Drink is once again brought to you by our friends at Ford's Gin. I'm Cappy, and in this series, we're going behind the bar. It's time to explore the journeys of the world's best bartenders, uncovering their passion, the latest gin trends, and of course, the social impact they make in their community. Beyond the Drink airs every other week right here on Beyond the Plate. If you're new to the pod, welcome. If you've listened before, we're glad you're back. Let's go Beyond the Drink. Chin chin. All right, everyone, season update. This is our Beyond the Drink season finale, but we have 3 more incredible Beyond the Plate episodes coming your way after this. So for now, today's guest has worked in some of the best bars and hotels around the world, including in Switzerland, Thailand, and Spain. He's brought a range of innovative concepts and a culinary approach to his beverage team, most notably for the reopening and plant-based transition, hint, hint, to the cocktail program he leads. You can find more on him in the episode notes and follow him on Instagram at Tollius_. That's TOLLIUS_. Please enjoy this episode as we go Beyond the Drink with Sebastian Tollius. All right, Sebastian, we start every episode off with an audio test. So for you, let's name 3 farmers market ingredients you love to use with gin.
With gin. Okay. I'm typically more of a seasonal drinker to say, so I think gin is much more of a warmer month spirit. I think it really transcends well into at least the fall. So farmers market products that I love to work with gin. I think gin is so versatile in a way that it just holds so much aroma that enhances a lot of its own ingredients. So let's go with celery. I think celery works really well. I love kind of those greener notes with that, as well as some more like acidic kind of fruits like green apples as well, especially as we're gearing up towards the fall here in New York State. You know what? Persimmon. I think persimmons are so delicious and honeyed and sweet. They play so well with just kind of those like brighter juniper notes too.
Love it. You sound good. Let's do it. All right, to kick it off, Sebastian, why don't you go ahead and tell everyone what you do?
Well, I'm the beverage director at a restaurant here in New York City, as well as a new opening of a cocktail bar that we just opened last month called 11 Madison Park. Also, we opened up a cocktail bar called Clemente Bar.
Love it. So how did you get there? We'd like to hear about a snapshot of your journey.
My journey really started, I was born into the industry, and I know so many people say that as well. But I think the long-lived hospitalitarians have some sort of a background, either their families worked in restaurants or they were always adjacent to this industry. And me growing up, my father was a director of operations for a hotel group. So literally grew up in hotels. As we were children, we lived on property. We moved around a lot to different tourist hubs throughout mostly Latin America at that time. It was something that I was always interested in. I remember at the dinner table with my dad, he'd tell me about his days, and I'd always ask him for scenarios about handling maybe difficult guest or something. And it was kind of just like a fun activity that we would do, and especially just being so close to really just that industry. Living on property, there's all these outlets. We had restaurants, we had the rooms division outlets. I worked as a bellman during the summers to make extra money, was an assistant server. My dad even framed my first tip. I received that probably when I was 11 years old. I was helping. It was in Mexico. It was a summer job. Really, really just fell in love with this industry, having grown up with it. So from that, I decided to go to hospitality school, and I studied hospitality management in Switzerland. I did that in 2000.
Which one did you go to?
I went to La Roche. So La Roche is one of the top 3 schools in Switzerland. You have Lyon, Lausanne, Les Roches, and La Roche was beautiful. It was perked up on the mountains, the Swiss Alps. Yeah, we were in this beautiful valley. I had an incredible time living there, but at the same time studying. And we were also given the opportunity to do internships abroad. My first internship here was actually in New York City. In 2008, I worked at a hotel on 53rd and Lexington as a front desk clerk.
What hotel?
It was called the St. Carlos Hotel.
So I lived on 54th and 2nd at that time.
Okay, yeah. It really started then. And, having had the experience of working in hotels, this was really kind of almost a trajectory that I was going to take. I ended up spending some time in Spain and worked in Thailand, eventually made my way back to Switzerland, and I lived there for a few more years before moving to the States. And that's really when I started getting more into restaurants. I always loved going out to eat. I loved discovering new foods and tastes and cultures. And I felt, the kind of the more hotel aspect to it wasn't really fulfilling me as much. I even spent some time in marketing and had more of this like kind of corporate position. But all I really wanted to do was kind of focus more on that almost immediate experience that you can have with kind of that food and beverage world. And my dad was definitely more of a marketer and finance person in that sense. But I really enjoyed kind of having these interactions at restaurants. So when I did one of my internships, I was a food and beverage manager, and I absolutely loved it. So I came back to Switzerland. I'd been working at bars and pubs and clubs at that time just to make some money throughout college and bartending for fun and a little bit of extra cash. I never really saw much more of that. It was essentially just another job to make some cash while in school, and ended up opening a hotel. At that time, it was one of the most expensive renovations in Switzerland. It was a 130 million franc renovation for the Grand Ambassador, and I joined as the opening team and really loved being part of that food and beverage team. And from there, that's really when I started getting much more serious into just focusing at least on this. This was way before I really decided that I wanted to pursue the bar world. But what I really enjoyed was just setting those SOPs, seeing the delicious food, learning more about wine, and eventually had to leave Switzerland. I was 8 years in, and I loved it too much, but I needed a new challenge and was looking into staying in Europe, but eventually found my way to Boston. And that was kind of the first start to coming back to the United States. I was born in Chicago, so I've never really lived in the States. And
you were?
I was, yeah. I was born in Chicago. I was only there for a little bit. My dad was working at the Swiss Hotel at that time. And then from there, we moved to Costa Rica and Mexico. And
where do you say you grew up? When someone's like, where'd you grow up? Obviously a loaded question.
The easy answer, when anybody asks me where I'm from, Chicago is the answer, right? We could just stop there. But I've only been to Chicago a few times, and more so as an adult. So it was really nice to get to know the city that I was born in. But the long-winded question or answer there is really, I grew up in Mexico, and I absolutely loved growing up in Mexico. We lived in Los Cabos and San Lucas, but mostly in Puerto Vallarta. I think my family really found their home in PV, and I was so lucky to have grown up there because it's such a small, this was early 90s. At that point, it was still a fisherman's town, really growing in its kind of touristic ways, and saw the evolution of what Puerto Vallarta became after that. But my formative years were in Puerto Vallarta. I went to middle school and high school there, and still very close to all my friends there. And my mom still lives there. So when I go home, I get to visit her in PV, and it's a great place to go home and also have an incredible vacation. So it was definitely a journey, to say. But from that, moved to Boston, was working at a hotel there as well.
Where'd you go in Boston?
Yeah, so I started working at the Charles Hotel in Cambridge. This was right near Harvard Square. It was a great transition into the States. I was in between moving to New York or moving somewhere else in Europe, but kind of just found, and I had a really close friend of mine living in Boston, and we reached out to him and asked him what he thought about Boston. And this is a German guy. He's like, I absolutely love it. The sports teams are great. I can't really say that now in New York anymore, but he just told me like Boston was incredible. So I did the jump, and I moved to start working at this hotel and started working in-room dining. From there, I was promoted to the general manager at the Regatta Bar Jazz Club. And that's really kind of where I started having more that hands-on approach to leading my own program and my own team. I really enjoyed that. But at the same time, what really happened there, which was the turning point for everything, was that I was at a cocktail bar, and I'd been bartending for all these years, and we were talking about you're making whiskey cokes and rum cokes and some shaker shots for the patrons. But I sat at a bar and I had a Sazerac cocktail. And when I sat down and I, really just enjoyed this drink, that moment for me was wow, this is what drinking like an adult is. This is totally different from anything I've ever seen. There were some cocktail programs that I've been to. I'd been to New York in the late 2000s and had gone to Beauty in Essex and seen PDT and all these things, but nothing had really kind of clicked until that moment. And this was 2014. And after that cocktail, I was like, okay, well, this is awesome. And I started digging into the history about it, learning more about the spirits and, where it was created, and really kind of just digging into the kind of the craft cocktail scene. So started going out to those bars more often, drinking paper planes, started doing my own research, essentially learning about all these classics, the scofflaw, Went to a bar restaurant in Boston and had dinner by myself. I sat at Eastern Standard, which was an incredible restaurant right in Fenway. They just reopened their new location, which is amazing. Sat there solo, had dinner, had a couple classic cocktails. I was like drinking some of the menu cocktails, but I was more excited to try the drinks that I'd been reading about. And I actually ended up walking home that night. It was a 40-minute walk from Eastern Standard back to my apartment in Alston. That's when I decided, like, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to apply here and I'm going to do everything that it takes to become one of those guys. And yeah, I mean, I quit my job a month or so later. I was doing the interview process, got hired at Eastern Standard as basically it was a breakfast server initially. I was going to do whatever it took to be part of that team. And I was working breakfast 5, 6 a.m. mornings to serve a couple coffees and, the nurses that were coming out of shift, and eventually moved into a bar back position. And, I really just did everything again. Started from the beginning, was bar backing for a few months, and then I was an apprentice. As an apprentice, there's different stages at Eastern Standard as you're growing into positions. And within a year, I was a white shirt bartender. So, once you became a bartender, you got your white shirt, your tie, your apron. And that moment was incredible. I still have a selfie of myself in the coat closet, just kind of celebrating that moment, which I sent to my mom. But I absolutely loved it. I loved the energy. I loved the restaurant. I loved the bar scene. I loved the community. And, I ended up spending 4 years there. And it was an incredible 4 years of working and living in Boston at Eastern Standard. And I learned so much from that place. But at that same time, it was time for me to move on. And I ended up deciding that I was ready to move to New York. I'd always known I wanted to come back. Having lived here when I was 18 and still being able to do all the things that I did at 18 was fun. And I couldn't imagine doing it with a more mature setting, more money in the bank account, rather than just kind of getting by when I was here. But I just loved the energy of New York and I knew I was ready to move down. So I ended up applying to come work at the Nomad. That was definitely the bar that I wanted to come work with. For me, it was kind of the equivalent of what Eastern Standard was in Boston, but the New York City version. The greater, the bigger, just overall attention to detail program that I'd been following for so many years, and reached out, had a couple interviews, was coming down to New York, taking the bus after shift at 4 a.m., getting here at 8 in the morning, 9 in the morning, just kind of bouncing around, taking interviews. I was looking around, obviously the Nomad and, this company was where I wanted to come work at. And at the same time, I was decided to move to New York. So at that time, I was basically taking the bus here, taking the bus back at night after my interviews, sometimes going straight into work. It was a long month of trying to figure out what to do, and eventually got brought back to do a couple trails here. And, I did an observational trail at the Nomad, which stepping behind that bar for the first time was an incredible feeling, getting to know the team, just feeling everybody's energy and passion. For me, coming more from a European background, and I think hospitality in the United States is definitely evolving in the best way possible right now. But for a long time, it almost felt stagnant. A lot of people that are working in this industry sometimes are just looking for this for a paycheck. They're not really doing this for the reasons of hospitality. And me studying it and growing up with it, and also having more of that European background where, kids in Italy are going to high school to study hotel management at 16, at 15. These are decisions that you make early on, because I think this life of service is really fulfilling. And sometimes I felt a little bit of that void here in the US. So to find a culture and just overall restaurants and bars that had that same mentality, for me, was super refreshing. New York, admittedly, wasn't the most hospitable at all times. There's times that I would go to restaurants and almost feel bad that I was there. It's a turn and burn some places, and you get it. There's a lot of tourists and they're just trying to get people in the seats. But to find a place that actually really embodied hospitality was really important to me. So I had the opportunity to be offered the position to come work at the Nomad, which I was ecstatic about. I did it. This is my dream. I can't wait to move down to New York. I can't wait to work with these team, work with Leo, work with Nathan, all these people that I've been looking up to for so long. But at the same time, they're like, well, would you consider taking an interview at 11 Madison Park? I'd come from fine dining and worked in a lot of 5-star hotels, and that rigidness just wasn't really appealing to me.
Had you started at Nomad yet, or this was in the process?
In the process, yeah.
Okay, got it. You were interviewing for Nomad, but in the process, they had mentioned EMP.
Exactly. Not knowing much about, obviously had heard about it. It's 3 Michelin stars. It had won 2017 best restaurant in the world. I'd never worked at a 3 Michelin star restaurant before. So I was intimidated, obviously, but at the same time was unaware of what it really was. But I took the interview. I wanted to do it to be kind, out of just to not kind of put down that position or at least that offer, since they had offered me, a job at the Nomad. And I came in, I interviewed with the general manager at that time. We sat at the lounge, and I asked them after the interview, before they invited me in for an observational trail, I asked them if I could actually come and sit at the bar and experience at least the bar at 11 Madison Park. And I remember having sat down and tried some of the food, but what I really saw was the bartenders were busy. They were meticulous, they were clean, The cocktails were delicious. It actually was like, now what? Like this experience was incredible. Nobody here took themselves too seriously, but they took their jobs very seriously. And I was so impressed just by sitting there. A couple weeks later, I came back for, observational trail as well. Spent the whole evening with them. And I left that night just really thinking like, oh, maybe everything has changed. Maybe everything that I thought was going to happen, moving to New York, coming to work at the Nomad, might just be shifting now. And it took me like maybe a week and a half of just really trying to decide what I wanted to do. But at the same time, I was coming down to New York to challenge myself. I wanted to keep pushing myself, to keep growing, to put myself in uncomfortable kind of positions to just evolve as a professional. And the obvious answer there was to come work at 11 Madison Park and to really push myself to do that. Now, here we are 5 years later, still with the company, still growing, still super excited to be here. And seeing the company evolve over the last 5 years has been super rewarding as well. But at the same time, to grow with the company and be a part of that growth has also been really rewarding too. So started off as a bartender in the summer of 2019. Obviously, the pandemic happened at that same time. The Nomad had split from 11 Madison Park. Chef Daniel had split with Will at that time too. So a lot of things were up in the air. It was a really tumultuous year, to say the least. But at the same time, also, it was really rewarding in the sense that we were able to take a little step back and be able to give back at that time, and having been in New York for less than a year at that point, closing down the restaurant, was here on the last day, March 16th, where we're basically putting away all our liquor, all getting rid of anything that might not be, or that's perishable, because we said, yeah, we'll be back in 4 to 6 weeks. 15 months later, we reopened those doors. So what a time though, but what a time to grow. And, with that really gave us the opportunity to focus on Rethink. So Rethink was a charity foundation that Chef Daniel co-founded with Matt Joswiak. And at that time, we were producing meals out of the kitchen. We essentially turned the kitchen into a commissary kitchen, coming in at 6 a.m, prepping 5,000 meals a week, really giving back to the community at that time. And that was so important to me, especially at a time in New York during the height of the pandemic in March, April. It was really important. And I really loved that we were able to do that and to be able to be part of a company that really fostered that and didn't just sit back, but acted upon at least help, and helping outside of these walls was really important for me. And I was so excited to have been given the opportunity to come back during the reopening in May 2021 as the head bartender. And that's, for me, that was huge. I'd worked this whole career. I'd found my passion in the bar industry. And now I'm growing with this company as head bartender to lead a program at a 3 Michelin star restaurant and just rediscover all these new techniques and also just have my own stamp on a world-class menu. So I've been very thankful for that. And I think I've learned so much from being here and evolved as a bartender, but also just in general, a professional. And I was the head bartender for just a little under a year before I got promoted to the beverage director role, and which is the role that I'm currently holding at Daniel Hume Hospitality.
I fucking love it, man. I'm fascinated by it because I grew up in the industry in a way as well, more on the wholesale side of the industry, but also I went to CIA. So I have that training. And then I went to FIU for hospitality. But at FIU, a lot of my classmates had come from hospitality school in Switzerland, but now they were coming to the US to do another form of the education, which was always really interesting to me. But that attention to detail and fostering the industry, if you will, and all these things you're saying, it's no wonder why you are where you are. I can imagine that when you sat down with Daniel and or Will or whomever, it was really easy for them to see, given your background and what you've been through and your point of view on the industry, why you were a good hire.
I hope so, yeah.
What does mom say about your path? I mean, is dad still with us or no?
No, dad passed away, which is also, kind of wanted to follow in his footsteps. And that was also really important to me. And well, yeah, it's contributed to a lot of the decisions I've made in my life to, be sure that I'm honoring his legacy. I mean, he was so well loved in the industry, and going back home, and everybody's always asking me, when are you coming down to manage this hotel? Or we miss Mr. Tollius. So it was obviously a big part of why I wanted to keep pushing myself to do it. But, I think initially when I decided to start bartending fully, I don't think my mom was fully aware of what the industry was, as maybe a rebellious teenager at times, and then growing up and going to school and, enjoyed going out and having a good time with my friends. She was concerned that I was going down a wrong path and not fully understanding what the bar industry was. But obviously she's very proud now. And, doing the things that I get to do with my teammates on a daily basis, it's definitely changed our view of what this is. The food and beverage industry is something for people to enjoy. People are paying for experiences. They can cook and drink at home. We're there to really create those moments for guests. And she spent a lot of time at the bar at Eastern Standard, and she spent some time here at E&P, and she's coming down in a few weeks, and she'll be able to check out Clemente Bar. But she's proud now, for sure. She's proud now.
Such a cool thing. I love that story. So what makes you happy about being behind the bar? I feel like you alluded to it a little bit, but is there, anything else?
Everything about being behind the bar, for me, it was like, especially a proper bar. When you're working at pubs and clubs, it's really about just turning and burning and making drinks for everybody so they can have a good time. When I jumped behind the bar at Eastern Standard, that was my stage. People were there to have a great time. You feel like that is your home, and it's a really comforting feeling to have standing behind your bar because you're a master of your craft. People are there to chat with you, to learn with you, to obviously try your creations, to have your cocktails, to feel the hospitality. So it's much more intimate actually than serving at a table. Being at a bar is, you're just a couple feet across from each other and everything's in view of the guests. And I love sitting at the bar. Anytime I go out, I just want to sit at the bar. Even if you're not necessarily fully interacting with the bartenders, you can see them working. You just feel that energy.
Completely different experience. Like that movement.
100%. And being part of that and feeling that, it was great. And I loved that interaction with the guests. I loved being busy. I loved building rounds of 10 cocktails at a time. And all of a sudden, you get all your drinks out. They all look perfect. They taste perfect. You clean up your station and you do it a million times again. It's really also like stimulating, like mentally. You're dealing with 100 things at a time. You're remembering recipes. You're remembering builds and orders and chatting with the guests. It's not like you can just tunnel vision and just look down. I think it's all about creating this whole experience, and you keep your head up even when you're in the weeds. And once you get out of them, it just feels great. And I love that part. I loved being busy. I loved having the guests in front of me. I loved making drinks. And more so now, especially after I took over the program in the opening, having that creative just control was even cooler. Like I had always loved cooking. Even in hospitality school, I did a year of culinary studies. At some point, I even considered just becoming a chef. I love that. I love the precision. I love creating dishes and even just cooking for friends. I don't really cook for myself because it's less enjoyable to cook for yourself, but it's much more enjoyable to cook for others. And the same thing you can get out of creating cocktails. So when I took over, it was really about, well, let's just try anything and let's get weird, or let's try something that never tried before, or something that I've been thinking about, or I tried in a dish that I want to replicate in a cocktail. I love that part too. There's so many parts about bartending that I've really, really enjoyed.
So cool. Can you share a cocktail or two or three that you're making these days? I was looking at that Clemente Bar menu, and man, I always say the sign of a good menu is when you have a hard time deciding what to order, and then you need to go back to order more of those things on the menu. And when I was reading that menu, I was like, oh, I kind of wanted to be one of everything. They all look like hits, but what are you loving, or what are the customers loving? It's early on, but I'm sure you're seeing patterns.
Definitely some patterns for sure. And I think really the exciting part about having Clemente Bar and still having 11 Madison Park and obviously ownership of both of those programs is how do we differentiate these menus? They're in the same space. We're directly upstairs from 11 Madison Park. You walk in through the same door. But for E&P, it was always we're working seasonally with the ingredients that the kitchen's using. We want to take any byproducts that we can to reutilize them. We want to work more sustainably in that way that, we can almost create this shared language between the bar and the kitchen. An ingredient that you might find on the tasting menu will be an ingredient that we're using in one of the cocktails. And I think that's kind of cool because you're really creating this connection. It's really about the experience, about seasonality. And I love that part about 11 Madison Park's menu. And when we're talking about creating a menu for Clemente Bar, we also wanted to talk about things that inspired us in different ways. We're talking about being a space that's completely enveloped by Francesco Clemente's artwork. It's beautiful. It's minimal. The star of the show on the back bar is this beautiful painting as well. There's a fresco as you walk up the stairs. So what are we inspired by this space? There's so many things that we could take from, rather than just working with the ingredients, but also focusing on things that inspire us from art. And that's texture and color. And at the same time, there's emotions that you get from art. I think that it evokes emotions in a sense that some things could be nostalgic or could remind you of things. So we really dug into the menu in that sense of more of a journey through kind of that lens. And we're not necessarily saying that the cocktails are inspired by art, but they're inspired by specific things that art is. And, there's specific colors that we were looking for to achieve. There are specific textures. And also when we were talking about what's nostalgic to us, like an orange creamsicle, that's a nostalgic flavor. And I think it's not about throwing that in your face, but it's also about having those subtle kind of moments when you're enjoying a cocktail, when you're in a space that potentially be like, this reminds me of this. Or we have a cocktail on the menu at Clemente that is inspired by Samoa cookie. It's coconut and chocolate. But instead of that, we made a cacao miso. We added pandan to the whiskey. There's a little bit of sesame in there as well for savory quality. So that tahini that's been infused into the cardamaro. And at the same time, it's like, what do we like to drink? I think a well-developed menu has to have a drink that's for everybody. A vodka shaken cocktail, a martini style drink, a Negroni style cocktail. I'm not saying that they're classics. I think a well-rounded drink, especially for a program that's as technical as we're doing, but we wanted to make it accessible in the sense that people can read this menu and not be like, what is this? I don't understand. I'm just going to get a vodka soda because this menu seems too intimidating. That was like the complete thought process about what we wanted to do, was to make this understandable and accessible. It's far from that, which I love, because I love just kind of that surprise element. I love a cocktail that's perfectly clear, that's packed with flavor. It's like almost looks like water. And then you're like, oh my God, this is insane. So that was really something that we were super excited about. And the Negroni Colada has definitely been one of the fan favorites here. This was a cocktail that I thought about years ago. I love painkillers and I love Negronis. Let's put them together. Let's make something that's, we can enjoy and kind of just have fun with. And there's cocktails that are inspired by my travels and specific dishes or things that I've had abroad. I mean, there's a cocktail called the Sakura Heights, which is loosely inspired by like Taiwanese cheese tea, which is essentially like jasmine tea or green tea that's topped with a whipped cream cheese foam. You can get it like in K-Town here or Chinatown in New York City, but I love that flavor. It's like, it's bitter, it's floral, and then it's like salty and creamy. And I had that and I'm like, I need to make a cocktail based off of this. So took vodka, Vinsanto, a little fennel liqueur, maraschino, one of the misos that we make. So it's a coconut and peppercorn, pink peppercorn miso. So that adds that savory quality just to balance everything out. We milk wash that, force carbonate it, and then we basically top it off with like a salted umeboshi cream. So umeboshi is salted plum. And top it and finish it with some sakura powder. So it's like floral with the cherry blossom and sparkling and light and, acidic, but then it has that creamy, salted foam on top that you just basically enjoy as you're drinking it too. So it's just fun. It's just fun to make these things.
What's exciting to you these days? I don't love using the word trends, but I guess it's what conveys it the best. But in the world of gin, or I guess bartending world in general, either one.
I think we're moving maybe away from trends, and I think we're starting to see a little bit more originality in more ways. And I think that's awesome. I think a lot more people are kind of taking the approach to be more thoughtful in the way that they're creating or layering flavors within cocktails. I think New York is in a really great moment of growth. For a long time, New York was the hub. It was the renaissance of the modern cocktail, basically movement, right? And we were almost stuck there for a while in a sense that we saw all these bars in London and Europe and Asia absolutely crushing it out there and being innovative and really kind of just pushing the bar scene. And I really feel like New York, we're up there again, and it's really amazing to see all these cocktail bars like Overstory and Shinji's doing incredible things, Double Chicken Please and Martinis. Like New York is back. And I love to see that.
It's like on fire in a huge way right now. As you were talking this conversation, I was like, man, New York's hot, like real hot right now in like the bar scene. It's pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's incredible. And to see people really being original, that's the coolest part. So, we'll start seeing some trends here and there, but I hope the trend stays on how to balance cocktails. That's the only trend I want to see. Balanced drinks. Let's just make the drinks balanced and delicious and not throw a million things there just because it sounds cool. Let's keep the trend of balancing drinks going.
Love that so much. This is awesome. Sebastian, in terms of like giving back or social impact, our listeners for Beyond the Plate and Beyond the Drink know that we celebrate that with all of our guests. And it's, as I was mentioning before we started recording, it's no different than the bartenders and beverage professionals we speak with. I would love for you to take a moment to shed some light on a cause. I know you mentioned Rethink a little bit earlier, but is there anything else you want to shed some light on? It could be a cause, it could be an organization, something you may want to raise awareness for.
I love the work that Rethink is doing, and what we're able to do within these underserved communities in New York is really important. There's so much food waste in the industry, and so many many people that need these resources. So to have an organization that's actually able to help in that sense and help small businesses, which is huge, to be able to provide for people in need is like a really big thing. And I think that's what's so important about working for a company that has those values outside of just the walls of 11 Madison Park and beyond. It's really important to think about those things, especially post-pandemic. The pandemic has changed a lot, has changed people in a lot, and has changed our industry in many ways. We're in the business of creating moments, but we're also in the business of feeding people, and that's huge.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, I would love for you to chat more about like mentorship or younger bartenders. You were speaking a little bit about that before we hit record, but I think that's hugely important and resonates big time if you want to go off.
I mean, I'm very passionate about this. The more I move away from working behind the bar on a nightly basis, the more I find myself in a position where I have to give back to the young bartenders that are really willing to take this craft seriously. As I mentioned, I think sometimes people that move into this industry kind of just see the highlights on Instagram or, don't fully understand, or I'm like, oh, bartending looks like so much fun and they're like so cool. Because yeah, bartenders are cool. There's much more than that. We're professionals, and that's the biggest thing. So to have people really passionate about this industry, that's where I want to jump in and help them grow. Because I spent the last 15 years, and more specifically the last 10 years, focusing on this and learning everything I could. Yes, through communities like USBG that were super helpful, at least the Boston chapter when I was a part of that. And then just like reading all the books myself, going out to bars myself, like doing all the research, doing all the education, and have built all this knowledge. But at the same time, I'm always learning. And by teaching, I'm also learning more. And to be able to give back to bartenders that are excited to do that, that's huge for me. And I think that's like the next best thing I can do now is to be able to help those younger bartenders or bartenders that are looking to continuously grow to be better and succeed. Because if they succeed, we all succeed.
Amazing. Closing it out, something a little lighter, I suppose. When it comes to etiquette in a bar, and I'm curious, given like the bar and restaurant status, if you will, that you're involved with, is there one thing we should like never do in a bar and one thing we should always do in a bar?
I think there's certain rules that should feel universal. Don't be a dick. We know that. That's the first one. Don't touch the garnish tray. That's another one. But really, just if you don't want to go out and you want to be mad, then don't go out. I think yes, we're there to turn people's nights around. And I'm not saying that we don't want you there because you're mad. Maybe you've had a hard day. That's what we're there for, to turn that around, but be open to that possible scenario. But we can also read the room, and maybe somebody just wants to have a quiet drink alone. Not being rude to the staff, I think, is obviously super important. And that's a big no for sure. We understand that everybody goes through specific days and they could have a tough day that day, but we hopefully can change that and we can turn that around. I think the biggest thing that we want to achieve is to have that person leave happier than when they walked in. That's the sign of a great experience. And I felt that so many times when I was bartending at 11 Madison Park. Tough days, long days. But there was that one guest interaction that came in and absolutely blew his mind out, or blew their mind out of the water. And they left crying in happy tears. And, I walked home some nights and I'm like, wow, I feel really good about that. And I'm very happy I was able to change that person's day, or, make that moment for that person. So that's selfishly, I think, one of the best parts about what we do. But, having guests come in and enjoy themselves is all we really want to make happen as well. So yeah, come in, have fun. Don't eat the garnishes.
It's so funny. People have said the garnish thing and I'm just like, really? People do that? But yeah, really, people do that. So mind-boggling, and not, I suppose. Sebastian, this was awesome. And I loved hearing your whole story and your background and your path, and really excited to continue to follow your path. And I know we're just a month or so into a new part of this journey, but really looking forward to checking out Clemente Bar. Thank you for your time. I know it's hard to break away at this moment, but really appreciate it, and best of luck to you all on it.
Thank you. Thank you. Look forward to welcoming you in, man.
Thanks, man.
Cheers.
This episode was produced by myself, along with Ian Cohen, Joel Yetton, and Sean Petrosian. Our digital media producer is Sarah McClellan-Mead. Our music has been composed by Goldford. Find him at iGoldford. As always, special shout out to my wife, Katie. If you have not started following me yet, you should. Find me across all social media at On Cappy's Plate, or go to BeyondThePlatePodcast.com and keep up to date with Beyond the Plate. Beyond the Plate is also on social at BT Plate Podcast. If you have a moment, we'd be grateful of your support by rating, reviewing, and even hitting that subscribe button to the podcast. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Drink, a production of Beyond the Plate. I'm Cappy.